This week on the Great Outside Podcast, I have a special guest for Father's Day, my dad, Wayne. Our story of getting into the outdoors isn't your typical father-son story. Follow along as we talk about how I got my dad hooked on the outdoors.
Waves are 4 to 5 feet swells in Creel Bay, but we were out there fishing, and
I remember that because we were over by Military Point.
And that is the biggest fish that you had ever landed, but you didn't get to land because he broke the line at the boat. So at the time, John Deere in town here, and actually that's where this boat originally came from years earlier. I went in there and asked them if they would take a trade-in, if I could trade in a tri-hull boat for an STX 38 rider. So we had bought a used jet ski, and we thought, well, all right, maybe we could give this a whirl. And the people that we bought it from said, we fish on this thing all the time.
Those have all been just Devil's Lake memories.
Oh, exactly.
We haven't even touched on a lot of the other stuff we've done, but you know, we've been to Montana elk hunting once. We've been to Colorado now 3 times elk hunting, Wyoming antelope hunting. Those that probably haven't heard, I drew a mountain goat tag in Wyoming this year, so we're gonna head out there the beginning of August, and you know, that's gonna be a daunting one, but we've got 3 months to try to get that done. And my dad's been along for a lot of these hunts. I was with him when he got his first mule deer out in the Badlands here about 5 years ago. He was with me when I got my first elk and my first mule deer.
Yep.
So there's a lot of these hunting experiences that we've been able to accomplish together and see each other's first. And welcome back to the Great Outside Podcast, everyone. As most of you know, this week is Father's Day, and I thought what better way to mix up the podcast a little bit this week than to pay a little tribute to the guy that's kind of taught me a lot about the outdoors, my dad, Wayne. Not a lot of people know him very well, and you know, you've probably seen a few photos of him out on the water, maybe an appearance or two in a couple fishing report videos, or of course he's in the fishing report intro when we're ice fishing out on, I think that was Doc Hagen's a couple winters ago. But anyways, he's the guy that usually is running the camera for fishing reports, taking the photos. He's learned over the years to take 10, 20 photos to get one good one, because I'm so picky about that stuff. So anyways, we thought we'd sit down this week and just kind of have a little discussion on you know, my childhood, his childhood, growing up in the outdoors, kind of, you know, we've got a unique story going. My dad and I have been fishing since I was a little toddler, and goes way back to that date. But the unique thing a lot of people don't realize is when it comes to the outdoors, a lot of times the father is the one that introduces the son into hunting. And we kind of have a unique story in that way, where I kind of flipped the tables on you back when I was a youngster and got you into hunting, and you got me into fishing. So I figured we'd start off this podcast with a little introduction of you, where you're born and raised, and you know, kind of as you're bringing up in the outdoors, what you had, because I know it wasn't a whole heck of a lot.
No, actually, thanks for inviting me on the podcast, Tanner. This is kind of a humbling moment to be interviewed by your son, but thank you. Born and raised Wimbledon, North Dakota, down between Jamestown and Valley City.
Which Wimbledon, North Dakota, to a lot of people probably means nothing, but a lot of people I've seen in the last couple of years, there's a tiny little lake down there called Spiritwood Lake, which you grew up fishing. And for those that are kind of trying to put Wimbledon, that area, on a map in reference to Devil's Lake, it's about an hour and a half south.
80 miles south of us, up here in Devil's Lake.
And that's the lake where all the zander were being caught in the last couple of years. So just for reference, people, didn't mean to cut my dad off.
No, that's okay.
Just to give people an idea on where Wimbledon really is in North Dakota. And I know a lot of people listening to this have seen the zander that have been caught and kind of have been trying to chase those last couple of years. So that's right in that neck of the woods.
Yeah, so that's the lake that I learned how to fish on with my dad. And my older brother, my dad basically taught him hunting, and he would take me fishing. So Spiritwood Lake ended up being the lake that we would fish on, and my parents had a hardware store down in Wimbledon, so he had a barometric pressure gadget at the store, and when he'd be watching the barometric pressure, he would say, all right, tonight we're going out fishing. And I didn't know if the pressure was going down, or if it was going up. What I learned on that lake, and my dad passed away by the time that I was 12 years old, but everything that I did with my dad was casting. There was no live bait. Everything was artificial. But having the hardware store, he had the neatest and the greatest gadgetry for fishing, because we had a hardware line, sporting goods line in our hardware store. So we used all that stuff out there trying to master the art of catching walleyes on that lake. What other people don't know about that lake is that there were lake trout put in that lake many years ago, and my dad actually caught one, and my sister caught one, but I never did. But by the time that I had reached the age of 12, my dad had passed away, so that kind of stopped the growing process with the great outdoors, other than once in a while going out with a family friend or a cousin to go fish on that lake as well. So really I was kind of removed from it until the time that we moved up here to Devil's Lake. And when we got up here in Devil's Lake, everybody said, you live on Devil's Lake, you got to have a boat. So my first experience with fishing Devil's Lake up here actually ended up being in about 1989. So that would have been when the lake has been totally shrinking in size. When I first moved up here, you used to put your headlights on during the day because the dust would be blowing so bad from the fields for being such a drought type of situation up here on Devil's Lake. So I bought a little 15.5-foot orange and white tri-hull.
The classic.
Yes, with a 50-horse Evinrude motor on it. And all spring when I bought it from a gentleman out here by Woodland Resort, and brought the thing home, was all excited, put it in our garage, spent all spring tinkering on it, putting in new carpeting, cleaning up the vinyl in it, waxing the outside, running the motor, to finally that grand old day of putting it in the water to take it for my first fishing expedition on Devil's Lake. And at that time, there was still a boat landing on the north side of 6 Mile Bay. And I felt that would be a safe place to put the boat in for the first grand trial. So your mom and I hopped in this thing, we backed it in the water, had it tied up on the dock. And I had the boat running in the garage, right outside the garage, with a garbage can with the earmuffs on it, I should say. But that day, we backed it in the water, got it started up, backed it up from the dock, hit the throttle, straight forward, couldn't steer it, smashed right into the dock. So that ended the first fishing expedition. First outing on Devil's Lake, and I thought, what the heck? I checked everything out on that boat, but realized the steering was seized on it, and I didn't realize that it had locked up. So we had no steering whatsoever. So that was the first outing. It didn't work very well.
Well, that would be quite the scenario going on. I could just about imagine Mom and that. She was done for the day.
She was done.
No, it kind of goes back to that whole, you know, this is the 11th podcast we've done, and it seems like every time we do a podcast, that's one thing, is the barrier to entry getting into the outdoors. And, you know, whether you don't have that upbringing in it or things like that. So it's just another prime example of how it really is important to try for people like you as a kid that didn't have that, you know, in your teenage years, to get that opportunity, that we can pass that on and try to make a difference to anyone we can.
Oh, exactly. So then you roll the clock ahead a little bit. We finally did get that boat on the water, finally got new string linkage in it, and we struggled. We did not know anything about this body of water up here. The tactics that my dad had, he had an old 14-foot aluminum boat with a 5-horse Sea King engine, which it just so happened last week I found a picture of that old outboard motor. It's a 1962 vintage model.
What the heck?
So we went out and we attempted to try to fish out here, and we were not having any success. The only thing we remember catching one day out here was an albino, just a white little fish. We didn't have any idea what it was. And at that time we were fishing out by the towers. So that still goes back to the days when the Towers bait shop and everything was still out there available that you could launch from out there. Eventually, both you and I hooked up with a friend of mine that said, you know, there are fish in this lake. It's just, this is what you have to do. And that would have probably placed you about the age of 5 when we really started to focus on fishing this body of water and start to learn it. The only problem is that as soon as we started to learn it, it started to change with all of the influx of water coming in. But that was my introduction with getting you to explore and actually taste the great outdoors with fishing. But on the other side of the coin, what ended up happening was I had a very good friend of mine that brought his 2 sons over here that wanted to waterfowl hunt. And we're going back to the time when you were 3 and 4 years old, and when they would come up here and want to waterfowl hunt, we had an old Red Ryder BB gun, and you would grab that thing and say, I'm going to go hunting with you guys. And you were too young, you couldn't at the time, and I didn't own a shotgun, I didn't own anything, but they would come up, spend the weekend at our place. I'd make phone calls for them to find a place where they could hunt, make them the breakfast in the morning before they go out in the field, and I'd go with them. But I would just kind of sit out there, and one thing led to another, that you had expressed such an interest and such a passion that you wanted to be with us out there, that by the time you were 6 and 7 years old, you were out in the field with us, being a whole part of this whole...
Just kind of immersed in all of it.
Yeah. And as that happened, I eventually went and did my hunter safety course, went and bought my first shotgun, and by the time that you were 10, 11, and by the time you did your hunter safety course, that whole thing had changed, because then it became a calendar countdown to when the opening happened for youth hunt, for both deer and for waterfowl. And then when the regular season hit, it all of a sudden became, you were telling your mom every time a duck that came in, because she would say, "Is that a greenhead?" "No, Mom, it's a shoveler." And so
well, I remember back to the days when we first started duck hunting, how we used to always, we had this little, I don't know what book brand it was, but little identification book, and we'd always shoot a duck. Then we'd have to walk back to our bucket, open up the book, and realize what we shot. So we were pretty cautious to not shoot too many, because we really struggled with IDing birds at first, because we had no clue what was going on. But I mean, we joke about that these days, because ducks are flying by at 20, 30 miles an hour, and like, oh, there's a pintail, there's a gold, like you know that duck now. But yeah, we had a pretty sharp learning curve really quick there.
Well, we did. I mean, but when it came to fishing on this lake, I mean, you can pretty much tell the tap, tap, tap of a walleye from the heavy shake of a northern. Mm-hmm. But when it came to the waterfall side of it, I mean, when they fly by at mock, and at that time we were basically setting up decoys and little puddles and hunting the sides of sloughs, and how that has totally changed over the years, to not climbing in the water, to putting a field spread out, which you taught me how to do, because I had no clue.
Yeah.
And that basically was through your friends that you had that was sharing all this with you as you went along. So it's like, all right, you're teaching Dad how to do this.
That looked at us and said, why are you guys struggling with the mud and all that, when you could just go throw a couple dozen decoys in the field and lay in a blind and not have as much work and be comfortable and not worry about busting anything out of the roost or things like that. And we kind of took akin to that, and eventually got ourselves a enclosed trailer and a couple dozen decoys, and kind of fully submersed ourselves into field hunting.
Exactly. And then after that, we ended up upland game hunting without a dog.
Which we don't know how we did.
A whole new learning curve again. You'd go out and chase roosters, and you knew that you hit it, but then it would be the ability to try to find the doggone thing in the tall cattails or along the edges.
I think the toughest part about us upland hunting without a dog growing up was not finding a spot to hunt, not finding the birds to get them up. It was after you shot a bird, finding the dang thing when it buried itself into the cattails or the reeds. And
yep, exactly.
That was a whole new ball game.
Oh, exactly. And then all of a sudden, now that you have your hunting partner Gage, and I mean, having the ability that you have spent hours and hours and hours with him, training him, which is very evident out in the field. If it's you and I engage out in the field hunting, he is glued to your side working with you. You can definitely tell that. I mean, he will share with me out there on the push, but his loyalty is to you, which is great. And if it's just he and I out, if you're not around and I take him out so he can, then he shares that same companionship to me out there as well, which didn't grow up with a lab, didn't grow up with a dog. So it's like, it's been a total, again, new big learning curve. And that actually has brought us to the point where we would go here in the morning and do a pheasant hunt or a duck hunt, and then in the afternoon try to go out and do a walleye bite.
Our classic cast and blast,
yeah,
we like to call
it. Exactly. And we had some pretty good success with it. And then all of a sudden we realized, to expand our horizons a little bit, that there's more to this state than just Devil's Lake, and we started reaching out to other areas to do some of that waterfowl and upland game hunting. And
thinking just back to the early days, of course the fishing was in the area, but like when you talk about all the waterfowl hunting we did, and deer hunting, and even some of the beginning pheasant hunting, I mean, it was all within 20 miles of Devil's Lake. We didn't really travel very far. We kind of were pretty lucky to be in this heartland of a mecca of outdoor everything. And even the trips we've been taking up until the last couple of years, down in the southern part of the state, everything's still a day trip out of here for us. I mean, we leave at 5 in the morning, get there at sunrise, or a little after sunrise, and spend all day chasing birds, and we're back here by supper time. So it's everything here, which we're pretty fortunate of, is within a driving distance. It's doable in one day from Devil's Lake.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. And the best part of that is the lunch, usually.
It is. Sometimes it's nice when you come back with the limit early and then you have the lunch and it's even more enjoyable. But no, we've been pretty lucky, and it's just crazy to think that we're relatively new to this. I mean, 23 years of us just starting to, because I mean, if I started at 5 and I'm 28, 29, it's not like we had this whole build up for the last 15, 20, upwards 50 years.
No, but
family, it was just, here we are.
You were hooked with your Snoopy rod when you were probably between 3 and 4 years old. We were out at Graham's Island fishing the pier, and you have your little 3-foot Snoopy rod out there with you, and we threw some bait on, casted it out, or you casted it out, and we're sitting there, and it's the middle of the afternoon, and everybody around there has not had any luck with catching anything, and here all of a sudden you're struggling trying to reel in your Snoopy rod, and you bring in at least a 30 or 32 inch northern. We didn't have a net, we didn't have anything along, but the gal that was working at the bait shop came down and seen what you were struggling with, so she wanted to take a picture of you with this fish, and she took our address down and mailed it to us. So we have, and we still, Sue had just recently found that photo.
I'm going to have to, when we get done with our interview today, I'm going to see if I can get some of those photos and we'll overlay them on the video so some people can kind of have some reference to what we're talking about.
Yep.
Because that northern right there was, like you said, was caught at the old marina there at Graham's Island. And, you know, when I was talking to Ryan Nelson from the park on the previous podcast, we were talking about that scenario, and you know, that place is 15, 20 feet underwater right now, and it's crazy to think that as a kid I was fishing off the pier there, and just how much that's changed, and thinking back to those days.
Exactly.
The one story I really thought was kind of interesting, so a lot of people always think about jet skis as being a recreational vehicle, and you know, you go out there and it's just for pleasure, but nope. You know, I don't remember, well, you gotta tell people about how you traded the boat in for a lawnmower.
Well, we didn't have such good success with that tri-haul, and we would take it on vacation with us for 1 week down in Minnesota, and we would take that tri-haul down with us, and we realized we put 4 people in there in a cooler. We couldn't get it on plane. So we'd have 2 people sitting up in the front, we'd have to shift everybody to the back to get the front nose up, and then we could take off and go. So here it is, 1993, and we had bought a different home here in Devil's Lake, and we needed a bigger mower. So at the time, John Deere in town here, and actually that's where this boat originally came from years earlier. I went in there and asked them if they would take a trade-in, if I could trade in a tri-hull boat for an STX 38 rider, and they said, yeah, we'll do it. So we ended up with a riding lawnmower for our other house here that we bought in Devil's Lake, and the boat was gone. And then, go ahead.
Which is really funny because you think about, you know, there's some memes going around Facebook and different things now that it shows non-fishermen's yards, and it's perfectly manicured, beautiful, and it shows fishermen's yard when they're gone for the weekend, and it's just weeds and it's growing everywhere. And so that just truly shows you how we weren't fanatical about fishing at that point, because we're trading in a boat to have a lawnmower so we can make sure our yard is looking good and kind of pulling back on our fishing opportunities.
Yeah, so then all of a sudden all the rage was the jet skis. So we had bought a used jet ski, and we thought, well, all right, maybe we could give this a whirl. And the people that we bought it from said, well, we fish on this thing all the time. So I bought some telescoping collapsible fishing rods that you could telescope down to very short, so you could put them in a little cubby up in the front, and we had a little collapsible or little folding plastic, I don't know, holder that we could put our tackle in. And the 3 of us would go out on this thing and try to fish. It did not work. And basically we ended up losing fishing rods, and temper started to flare.
Sanity?
Yeah, because it was like one person was sitting, casting out front. We had one person flipped around on a 3-seater, casting off the back. Then the one in the center was kind of just out of luck.
I couldn't even imagine just throwing one full-size adult and trying to fish off a jet ski, let alone 2 adults and a kid.
Yep. So we did that 2-3 times, and we figured that isn't going to work. And that's when we got really introduced to the friend of mine that started taking us out, and we made a pact with him that we would go out once a week. His daughter was the same age as you, and I think you guys at the time were probably about 7, and it became once a week. It was either Tuesday mornings or Friday mornings, but every week for 4 hours we would go out and fish Devil's Lake. And that's where we really started to learn about this body of water. And my job was always to launch Jeff into the water with the boat with you guys in it, and then park the trailer. And I'll never forget, probably the third time that I had parked his trailer and I was backing it up into the boat ramp, which is on the east side of Highway 20, I don't know if they call it the East Bay or East.
Yeah, East Bay Recreation Area, or East Bay.
Well, I was backing it up in the parking lot, and as I started backing up, I heard a kabang. I didn't see a thing. I get out of the vehicle, and I look back, and it's like, oh, there's no damage. So we went out and fished, and we did very well that day. We caught our limit, and then when we came in, I had to back that trailer up to load you guys back up. And I couldn't back the trailer up because when I originally had backed the trailer up into the parking lot, what I did not see was a cut off stump, and I hit the back axle of that trailer on it and bent the tongue. So it was in a V-shaped buckle. So when I backed it up, the trailer just automatically went to the side. We finally managed to get that thing in the water and get the boat back on it, but I trashed his tongue, and apparently it had been hit before, because there's no reason that thing should have busted right there, but we laughed and laughed and laughed about that for a long time.
See, it's the things like that that you'll never forget for the rest of your life. And
no.
If I'm not mistaken, I think the only thing we did back then for fishing was bottom bouncers and spinners. We didn't really do any bobbers, if I remember right, or even any pitching.
We didn't. And then towards the end, when we were with them out there fishing, we started to learn how to tie up in vertical jig. And that was more along the old bridge that was capsized out here along Highway 20 and 57. Or we started to tie up in the trees and start to jig, which that was a whole new learning curve again.
Just shows to go, some people are thinking these are some of the simplest of tactics, but for people listening that haven't done a lot of this or want to start doing this more with their family, especially with everything going on, like it seems intimidating, but it's not a daunting task to get your family, yourselves into this industry and start fishing and start learning. And if you've never driven a boat before, you get comfortable with it, and it just takes time, but it's something that I think builds a person.
Oh yeah, then eventually we became kind of diehards with the fishing part of it, because it didn't matter if the wind started to pick up and get stronger, we would still go out. And back in, I believe it was 2000, when that severe weather came through on that Friday night and uprooted a lot of trees in town, and there was damage east of Devil's Lake. That Friday night, we ended up going out into Creel Bay, and we decided to fish again with Jeff that night. And that night, it was just the three of us in the boat, but it was so rough out there. Another one of those nights that you'll never forget, because I got sick on the boat because of the waves were 4 to 5 feet swells in Creel Bay. But we were out there fishing, and
I remember that because we were over by Military Point.
And that is the biggest fish that you had ever landed, but you didn't get to land because he broke the line at the boat, and it was a very large northern, and we could not get him in the net.
But you could see him.
We could see him 3 times with the swell smacking us, and I ended up kneeling down, and that's when I got sick in the boat from this motion sickness. But I'll never forget, we came in that night, and I had a life jacket on, and when we got up to the shore, I went to hop off the boat and step onto the dock, and I slipped, and I landed right in the water in 2 feet with my life jacket on, laying there drenched.
I thought you were going to say you got up on shore and kissed the ground when you made it.
Oh no, I ended up in the water, and everybody had busted a gut and started laughing. But then that night when we got home, I think we had 2 fish to show for it, and that's the night that the storm had hit, and it was just a major. There was a lot of disaster in town that night.
Straight line winds that came.
Straight line winds, yep.
No, that was a great night, and I vaguely remember. I don't remember how old I was. I remember fishing there and having the big fish, and it was a lot of fun.
It's either 2000 or 2001, but it's so, yeah.
Hard to believe that was over almost 20 years ago.
Exactly.
Time flies.
It does.
Yeah,
it does.
So no, we've had some good experiences on Devil's Lake, and we really didn't get back into boat fishing, until probably 2000. What would that have been? About 2010. We were shore fishing pretty much from there now on. I mean, we would go out and Friday, Saturday nights, or even during the week, and just go to 6 Mile Bay or Mauvais Coulee. And what was really cool is we were watching some homemade videos here a couple months ago, and you filmed when the flooding took place back in the early 90s, and there's videos of you driving your car through water over in the Narrows and on the old Golden Highway, which is really tough to fathom when you think about we're trolling on there or vertical jigging in 20 feet of water, and 25 years ago you were driving your car on that road, and just to see that how much has changed. And it's tough for me to recollect it because I was in a young age, but for you to remember some of that, it's been probably pretty cool to see.
Oh, it was, and it was just like how much this has changed. I mean, then I'd take you out in the vehicle and I'd be driving around and videoing it, and we were actually out by 20 and 57 when they were starting to build up that road out there, and sitting and waiting for the pilot car to get us through the water, driving through and on, I want to say it was Highway 20 that was going through, where they were starting to push the fill back in to build that road back up. Just to imagine that, I mean, now when you think back to it, it seems like it's eons ago, but it wasn't that long ago that was a totally different picture out there.
Yep.
Exactly.
And then, we were fortunate, the same family that we did a lot of fishing in their boat with allowed us at one of their lake lots to put a dock out, and we used that for a lot. I mean, I was in middle school, and I think it was probably right around freshman year of high school is probably the last time we had the dock there. But I mean, a lot of people think it's just dock fishing, but we probably had some of our best nights of fishing right off that dock. And I vividly remember the one night the fish was actually on the wall over there. It was Mr. and Mrs. J's restaurant for a while, but we were there and we were just slip bobbering, and I mean, it was 6 feet of water with stumps everywhere. And I remember thinking that night, and I asked you, do you think there's any whoppers around here? And sure enough, like 30 minutes later, your bobber goes under, and it's a big fish, and it gets up to the side of the dock. And it's weird to say that because it's not like the side of the boat, but the side of the dock. And here I am as a little, 12-year-old trying to net this 29-inch walleye. And the first time it came up, I missed with the net. And then I felt bad because I was usually you get one chance at a fish like that. And it came back, and sure enough, I was able to get him in the net for you. And that was the biggest walleye I think you've ever caught.
It was the biggest one I ever caught.
And then Mom, a year later, which is the fish right behind us here, catches that 28-inch walleye off that same dock.
Exactly.
So it just goes to show you how good the fishing really can be from shore. I mean, it's tough to think about. You always want to be in a boat, but half the time you really don't. Like this morning, we just went out and threw bobbers and Lindy rigs. I mean, it wasn't the best of fishing this morning, but you don't have to go spend an hour and get the boat ready if you need to after work. You can just drive out and wet a line really quick and still have opportunity to catch and fish some quality fish at that.
Exactly. And then the other thing too is that this lake is a 365-day-a-year lake to fish, because the other thing that Tanner did for me is he convinced me that we should buy a ice house, and it was a pop-up, and he said, we'll go half and half on this, and we're going to go do some ice fishing in the wintertime. And I was really hesitant about it because my only experience on ice fishing out here was early ice, and that would have been back when we first moved here, the winter of 87, 88. Friends of ours from Valley City would come up here and they ice fished up here all the time, but they always wanted early ice. And I remember going out and walking out on the ice by Military Point where they were all ice fishing, and I said, I'll meet up with you guys out there. And as I walked out to where they were all standing on sheets of plywood. And it's like, what are you doing? And they said, well, the ice is pretty thin. And it's like, that cured me right there. I did not want to be out there because I was like, I need thicker ice than that to stand on. So that kind of cooled my jets for a lot of years until, again, you wanted to go out and do the ice fishing thing, which I had no experience with whatsoever.
And I think our first day ever ice fishing together was when we went to Olford's Bay on Christmas Eve, I believe.
It was.
It must have been like a sophomore or so in high school, somewhere around that ballpark. And I remember we took the four-wheeler from the house and drove down there, and you had your life jacket on, and I couldn't catch a fish, but you sure lit the Northern up that day, and I made a little YouTube video on it.
Had
a little remix to Ice Ice Baby going with it, but that was, I think, our first time together on the ice.
It was.
So yeah, and going back to thinking, 12 years ago or so was the first time we ice fished together, and you're pretty cautious about that, and we slowly kind of got you into it, and then to think now here we are 12 years later and you finally got out ice fishing by yourself. And for a lot of people that don't know you, that's a big step for you.
Yeah, because my favorite thing with ice is I like it in my glass.
that was always the ongoing joke. The only ice my dad liked was in his glass.
Yep. So, but I thought, all right, this is leap year. So it was February the 29th, and I put myself together and went out and fished the morning out by Doc Hagen's, I guess. Didn't turn out to be a successful morning with catching a lot of fish, but did it and can say I did it, and I wanted to be it on a date that I would never forget. So the 29th of February this year was my first outing out on the ice by myself without anybody out there with me. So
well, hopefully we don't wait another 4 years for the next time you go out by yourself.
No.
But
no,
you're getting the hang of it pretty good now. I mean, we've got ourselves each of XLR, and I've got an auger, you've got an auger. So now if I'm fishing somewhere else or not around, you've got your own stuff to use, and we've kind of really morphed into that now.
We did, but it kind of freaked me out when you and I did go out the first time this winter, which was actually after the first of the year when you and I finally got out. And we made our way out on the ice, and you were using a side-by-side Ranger. And when we hit the ice that day, we were going through slop. And it's like, for as cold it has been, how could there be slop along the side of the lake here? And I was sharing that with a gentleman here about a month later, our fishing outing that day, and he said, well, with all of the heavy precipitation and that snow that we had last fall, he said, the water is going up over the course of the winter. I never even gave that a thought. So it's like, well, that's why we're hitting all these soft pots. Yeah, I thought we were going down for sure. So
you just gotta hit the floor and give her a little gut.
Yeah, no kidding.
Make it through.
Yeah.
But I remember that day because it was kind of funny. We went out and we set up the pop up, and we were fishing probably for, I don't know, probably 20 minutes or so, half hour. And, we were probably a half hour after sunrise. So, I mean, we kind of missed that first little window, but we were marking a few fish, but we weren't really getting any bites. And we were just wondering, like, maybe it's going to be one of those days where they're just not active. And lo and behold, about 35, 40 minutes into it, I had one bite, and it was a perch.
Yep.
And I'm like, well, what the heck? So I had to take a photo because it might be the only fish for the day. And then the next fish is like a 14 to 15 inch walleye. It's a keeper. I'm like, okay, we're getting somewhere. And then the next fish hit, and I remember the rod going, and I'm like, oh, I can't really move this thing. And I'm like, this is a fish. And I start reeling it, and I'm like, I think it's a walleye. It's not acting like a pike or anything like that. And we were fishing only in 14 feet of water, so it didn't take long to get the fish up to the hole, but it ended up being about a 26 inch walleye. And when it came up, and the head hit the bottom of the ice, and didn't hit the bottom of the ice, but it got into the hole, and we could see it. We both kind of like froze in time, like, well, what do we do? Like, I wasn't expecting it to be that big of a walleye, and that's just, it's crazy to think fish will do that to a person. But yeah, we both sat there, and then I kind of looked at him like, well, you can help me grab it out of the hole? Like,
Yep.
So those memories are great.
And also, after that fish came out of the hole and we did your pictures and then did the release, it was like, that kind of cemented that day, because after that big fish came through, it was done. I mean, it was full light outside, and it was pretty much over, but it was a very fun morning, except the nervous part of going back up to shore again for those slush pockets.
But we kind of avoided that. I mean, that's the nice thing about having these GPSs we do, and kind of following your track, we ended up skirting around that little pocket, and we're all right. But yeah, it was a cold morning. I remember that.
It was cold.
But then I also remember, talking about just fishing stories and things like that. There was a day I would have been, I think when I saw it was back in 2014, somewhere about that ballpark. It was the first time I caught a big walleye it was 28 inches, and we were fishing early May. New Mill Bay was where we were actually fishing, and that was the first day we were out in the boat that season. And I remember because we hit this one point and we started pitching, and I caught a white bass, and then about 10 minutes later caught a pike, and no walleyes, and we had probably an hour or so of fishing time left, and we skirted across the bay and went into this really small little back nook of the bay, and we were basically just made a whole U going through there, just pitching to the weeds, and no success. And we kind of came on the back end of the U, and we're coming back out and kept pitching to the weeds. I'm like, well, why do we have to pitch to the weeds? Why wouldn't I just throw to the middle of the bay? I'm gonna try something different, deeper. And I threw it into the middle of the bay, and I just gave one crank in the reel, and I'm like, oh, I got a fish. And then I'm like, that's a big fish. And I kept thinking it was going to be a pike the way it was acting. And then it got up to the side of the boat, and we both stopped, and we're like, it's a walleye.
Yep.
So you just never know, especially with spots you go to. And, I think I've told this story before, but this one was actually 2 years ago. In May, we were fishing the north end of 6 Mile Bay, and we were pitching a weed line, and it was right at sunset. You'd caught actually a pretty nice 23, 24 inch walleye. And I think we had one keeper that we kept for eating, and then a couple pike. And we were coming to the end, and we probably had maybe 150, 200 yards to go till we hit the peninsula of this weeds. And we're like, when we get to that point, that'll be done. Like more than a couple more casts. It was going to be probably 15, 20 casts, but we're just trolling along there. And once we hit that point, we were going to head back to the boat ramp. And, it wasn't more than 3-4 casts after I said that. It was another one of those pitching into 2 feet of water, and every other cast you're snagging on something or getting weeds, and cast it and set the hook, and I'm like, that's a snag. And then all of a sudden you just feel that subtle move of the rod tip. You're like, that's a fish.
Yep.
And that was another fun one in 4 or 5 feet of water, and that one ended up being like a 28, 29-inch walleye. And again, you were running camera for the fishing report video, and I'm eating sandflies trying to release it.
Yeah, that was kind of funny because you were swallowing them as you were talking, and it's like, this is live.
You just roll with it because there's no redoing that. And so it's just all those memories that we've been able to create are going to be everlasting. And those have all been just Devil's Lake memories.
Oh, exactly.
We haven't even touched on a lot of the other stuff we've done, but, we've been to Montana elk hunting once. We've been to Colorado now 3 times elk hunting, Wyoming antelope hunting. Those that probably haven't heard, I drew a mountain goat tag in Wyoming this year, so we're going to head out there the beginning of August, and that's going to be a daunting one, but we've got 3 months to try to get that done. And my dad's been along for a lot of these hunts. I was with him when he got his first mule deer out in the Badlands here about 5 years ago. He was with me when I got my first elk and my first mule deer.
Yep.
So there's a lot of these hunting experiences that we've been able to accomplish together and see each other's first. And last year I was able to witness you get your first bull elk, which was quite incredible, and that was just a bull of a lifetime for a first hunt over a counter the tag too. That just
unbelievable.
Was amazing, and we kind of made a pact together. Probably it was 5 years. Well, 2012 was when we went on our antelope hunt. So right after that, we made a pact of we're gonna either go out west with our bows and hunt mule deer every year, and then the years that we can, we're gonna go elk hunting or do. Whether we travel out of state, we're just going to go west and do some kind of hunt while you're physically able to do that. And I think you're in better shape than me for a lot of these hunts because you're out walking 4 or 5 miles every day and running every so often. And you helped pack the bull out this last fall. And for someone like you to be able to do that was really a cool experience. And I wish I had the photo right now to show people, but your unique setup to cross the river. My dad's bull ended up, when it fell, it was probably. It was about 270-yard shot, but it was across a river that was about waist high. So we had to go back the next morning with waders on, and we had to improvise because Jared, our guide, and myself had kind of basic waders, and we didn't have any other ones. So you just had footies, which you looked like Aquaman walking into the water to go.
Oh yes.
Go over and start quartering out the bull, but all those experiences are just what it's all about.
No, it was an experience of a lifetime. And not falling, walking across the river, and they had just released water from the reservoir in that area, apparently, because there was a lot of silt on top of those rocks where we were walking, and it was slippery.
And not only is it slippery, but you've got your rifle, which is, that rifle we were using at Gunworks is probably 8 pounds or so, maybe 10. Then you've got 60 to 70 pounds of elk meat in your backpack going across here. So every step is very delicate.
Yes, it was. And the footies had leaks in them. I was cold. It was 29 degrees. And my boots, even though I had everything cinched up, they were full of water. It took 2 days on boot dryers to get those things dried out. It didn't matter. It was an experience of a lifetime. And I got to experience it with you. Same way that when you harvested your first one out there. Something that you'll never be able to recreate, but the memory to it lasts a lifetime, and it's irreplaceable. I mean,
it is.
You can't put a dollar value on it.
And just the fact that one thing I think is really great what we do is we have all these hunts to look forward to, but we also we don't go crazy in the off season with hitting the weight room and all this stuff, but we like to keep physically active, and I think it's been quite amazing to see you do that. I mean, not a lot of people know probably the fact that you used, I don't know if people want to know this, but you used to smoke and you lost 30 pounds. You've been smoke free for
6 years. And actually, that was the whole idea behind this big game hunt. You told me that if I'm going to get up there in the mountains and get into the lighter air, that you're not going to have lung capacity to do it. So it was like, well, there's the incentive that I need to get off smokes. So smoke free for 6 going on 7 years. But then after I quit, I put all the weight on, and then all of a sudden it was like, well, now I'm going to have to figure out how to get the weight back off. So it started being just a daily walk 4 miles, but then eventually it became walking and then trying to figure out how to jog to try to help burn the calories to get that weight back off. And I have a gentleman that is in his early 70s that has had triple bypass surgery that runs marathons, and I went to him to say, how can I do this? This is something I really want to do. I want to be able to go out and experience these hunts in the mountain, and how am I going to get myself into shape with what I got here? And he basically kind of gave me a guideline to work with, and he said all you got to do is get yourself to run between one telephone pole to the next and take a break. And actually my stepfather-in-law said the same thing. He said start there, and he goes eventually you'll build up endurance where now it's not easy, but I still do it because I know I need to look forward to the upcoming hunting season. And for me, it's not something to start and stop, so I just stay with it.
Yep. It almost goes along too of what we did getting in the outdoors. It wasn't just, all right, we went and bought all the decoys and everything, and just how do we slowly started and built up and just got into it and learned. And
Yep.
I mean, when we did the hunt with your mule deer and learning how to use the Onyx maps and, the public land out in the western part of the state, and to think about that 10 years ago, that I would have no clue what we're doing out there, but just, going with people and the guides we've learned from and all that, every time you go out there, you learn something, and it just really helps to build that.
Oh, I know. Getting back to that mule deer hunt that we did out in the Badlands, family friend of ours, he is from that area, and we ended up going out and talking to his dad out there that has land.
He's a rancher out there.
Rancher out there, and he kept underneath the suspicion that when we went out to meet with them that we wanted to hunt on his land. And basically I said, no, we don't want to hunt your land. I said, I just want to have somebody out here that I can talk to get a better understanding, because I said, no, this is going to be a public land hunt. He goes, you don't want to hunt my land? And I said, no, we don't. He goes, well, that's a first. He goes, everybody comes to ask me. I said, that's not what we're after. I said, we want to know if we can do this as a public land hunt. Well, by the time that we were done, he kept offering things that if we needed.
His loader, if we needed to skin the deer, and
Yep.
checking in with us. And, we even, I hope someday he takes us up on it, but we said, for all your assistance, everything, we'd love to get you guys out here in Devil's Lake and hop in the boat with us for a day or two,
Yep.
and let's go walleye fishing. And
Exactly.
I think that's one thing this industry has shown to me a lot too is, you just meet a lot of people, and, people be like, hey, come on over to Wisconsin and let's go salmon fishing, and I'll take you over here to Devil's Lake and go walleye fishing. And some of the best people are around in this industry, and just being able to swap different trips and stories and scenarios and ideas and stuff like that's been pretty cool.
Oh yeah, and then so we looked at the grassland map, and he kind of explained the whole story out there. And the Montana season opened a little sooner than the North Dakota side, so a lot of times you have some of these muleys that'll come across because they got pressure on the Montana side, and he's right on the border. And then he kind of drew some stuff out on the grasslands where he's had people out there before that he shared. So we took that all into account, and then when we were done, we gave him some fresh Devil's Lake walleye that we had just caught, and he goes, do you want me to keep this? And I said, yeah, exactly. He goes, well, do you guys want to come back and hunt pheasants then? And I said, no. No, we're just here. We just wanted some help just to kind of get an understanding.
Yep.
But I did call him after we were done because he was disappointed we never stopped in afterwards because we were successful out there, but I told him we didn't need to. We packed it out, got everything done, and just gracious for his hospitality to be willing to help.
And it goes a long ways.
It does. It does. So
we've had quite the experience in the last 28 years or so of just getting involved in the outdoors. And with Father's Day weekend coming up, I hope everyone has the opportunity to enjoy some time out in the water or anything with your dad, and not just your dad but your whole family. It's one of those years where I think everyone's kind of taking a step back and slowing down and realizing what's important in life. And it's all those important things that'll always last a lifetime. And I'll remember all the fish, the ducks that we've been able to hunt, and specific things, and it's what makes a person.
Exactly. And again, the memory is there forever.
It is.
You'll never ever forget about it.
So I don't know if you have anything else you want to add, or if I'm trying to think if we had any other stories that we've had from. I know we've got a lot of stories, but they're all over the board.
They are.
We've been frustrated, we've been happy, I think I would like to end with this story. I think the best one is, that deer used to be right around the corner here. It wasn't a monster buck by any means, but it was one of those that it had a story behind it. I think I was my senior year of high school. We were hunting, it was actually a piece of Yeah, it was a piece of public land north of town.
Yep.
And I had shot this buck, and I figured I'd hit it because you could hear the thwop of the bullet hitting the deer. And of course, we only had one pair of waders. I don't even know why we had waders in the vehicle for whatever reason. But where I had shot it was about a 140-yard shot, and there was a piece of water between us, and he was almost on this little island. And that was the year all these deer were running through water, and I think we just had a super wet fall. And
We did.
so I threw the waders on and walked over there to go find this deer, and he ran, I think it was back to the west, and ended up going through another little part of water, and sure enough, there he was laying in the second little spot. So there was a piece of water, an island, and another piece of water, and he was on the other island behind there. And so I was able to drag him through the first 100 yards of water, get him to the island, and I was just exhausted, and I couldn't do it anymore. And we didn't have any other waders, and there was no way you were going to be able to do it by yourself because he was starting to get waterlogged and everything. So kind of let you take the rest of the story from there.
So I ended up basically heading out with just my boots on, long johns, and my hunting pants, and I walked through the water. And at points it was knee high up to waist high, and it was probably 20 degrees out.
It was cold.
And it was windy, and it was snowing. And finally I got up to where you were at, and we grabbed that thing together, and we drug it all the way back to the truck. And when we got it to the truck, we took pictures. I was an absolute icicle, but then we field dressed it, got that thing loaded, and then I had to strip down because I had to put on your extra set of clothes that you had along and get everything else off because I was actually frozen to the bone. And we got back that afternoon here to the house, and I never felt so good to get in some warm clothing and get out of that.
I think we had to sit in the hot tub.
We did sat in the hot tub out, but it was like, oh my God.
And that was one of those experiences where, like I said, it wasn't a big deer by any means, but it was like we got back and I'm like, I have to put that one on the wall just for the fact of every time I walk by that deer now, I think about that day and that story.
But that walk over to where you were was 20 minutes, and then the walk back, another 20 minutes walking through that water. And it was cold, absolutely. But it was well worth, again, that memory, the experience. You harvesting that beautiful buck that day. I never would have thought we'd have found that thing out there. Just the way the weather was coming in. It was late in the season.
It was almost like an early November blizzard coming through.
Yep. And I believe it was on the last day of the season, on a Sunday when we did that. So, yeah.
So now it was a great day, and now I'm looking forward to the summer. A few more days on the water. We'll get out and do a little walleye fishing, and before you know it, we'll be in Wyoming hunting billy goats. And
exactly.
Yeah, you actually drew a North Dakota cow elk tag this year, so we've got that.
Yes.
Get Gage out and do a little. So we've got a busy 4 or 5 months ahead of us here. So I think it's going to be another great hunting season for 2020, and I encourage everyone to get out and do what we're doing.
And I would just say that, from the experiences that we've had with our hunting and the fishing, success is not measured on what you harvest. The success is the experience, the time, the quality of time that you get to spend together, because you never know when you don't have that time anymore.
Yep.
So.
Like when we spent, we went on it ended up being a 6-day or 7-day elk hunt in Montana, and it was just raining every day. And I think we spent probably let's just say it was 7 days. I think we spent 4 of the 7 days in a box blind, just sheltered from weather for 10 hours. But you get to learn a lot about each other and spend a lot of quality time. And we drove back from that hunt, and we're just like, you know what? May have not have been the outcome we wanted, but the experiences we learned from it and everything has made it the trip of a lifetime, no matter how.
Yeah, when I think back to that particular hunt, I still think that was probably our best hunt ever. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't because we never fired a shot. It was, we didn't harvest anything, but it was just the quality of the time. I mean, it was it was the outdoors, getting to learn each other way more than who would ever thought.
Or when we went on your elk hunt in Colorado, not this last year, but the year before that, to fall of 18, and we did a 14-day road trip where we took a week and went to Moab, Utah, and hiked around there. We went down to the Grand Canyon. We went to the four corners of Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah.
Yep.
Those four corners. And then we went over to Telluride, and we just explored before we went on our 5-day hunt. And that was, I think we put on like somewhere of like 3,500, 4,000 miles in 14 days. And it was exhausting, but it was one of those, like, it was the trip of a lifetime again. So we've been able to do some.
And we were still talking to each other when we got home.
We weren't in any fights.
No, nothing.
So it was really worth it.
It was.
So thank you for joining me this week for the podcast.
You're welcome.
On the Father's Day special for The Great Outside. And hope everyone else gets to enjoy some time with their fathers this weekend and their sons. And stay tuned next week. We'll have another guest on.
Thank you.
You bet.